Today, a member who already has a selected workspace accepts an invitation to another one without submitting a trusted tenant identifier. Before acceptance, the current bearer token returns OK and lists an item from the original workspace. The user posts one opaque invitation code, and the server resolves its target from the stored invitation. Acceptance creates the explicit membership, changes the server-owned selector, and consumes the code. It also rotates the identity security stamp, so the token used for the transition becomes stale and now receives forbidden. After a fresh sign-in, the target workspace returns OK and the previous workspace item is excluded. This is switching through a new invitation. Freely choosing among memberships already held, without consuming another invitation, remains the next slice. Keep three concepts separate. An invitation is a short-lived capability for one transition. The account matching one unique normalized email may join one tenant before an expiry time. A tenant membership record is durable authorization state connecting that user and tenant afterward. FeatureLab user.tenantID remains, but only as the server-owned selector for the active membership. The selector is not enough to prove authority. The matching membership row must be active and its version must match the issued claim. Combining these ideas into a client-authored tenant field would let the request nominate its own security boundary. The client presents an invitation code, while the server derives the email, tenant, selector, and claim values from current stored state. Tenant membership record gives the relationship a real home. User ID plus tenant ID forms the composite primary key, so one account cannot accumulate duplicate authority for the same workspace. IsActive says whether the relationship may authorize requests. Version is a long that changes whenever the membership lifecycle changes, letting the policy reject a claim issued from an older state. FeatureLab user still stores tenant ID, but that value selects which membership a fresh sign-in should load. It is no longer the membership record itself. Work items, reports, and chat messages keep their existing tenant ID columns. This episode changes how a principal reaches a trusted tenant scope, not how every protected entity stores its boundary. Episode 12 users already have a server-owned tenant ID and protected data under that scope. The migration adds a composite primary key, a user foreign key, and positive version check constraints, then inserts one active version 1 membership for every non-empty legacy selector. GID empty users are skipped. FeatureLab user.tenantID stays unchanged, so a fresh sign-in still selects the same workspace. A bearer token minted before episode 13 has no tenant_membership_version claim, however, so it must re-authenticate before the new tenant member policy can authorize it. The schema constraints protect stored rows, while migration tests prove a non-empty selector is backfilled and an empty selector is skipped. A separate registration test proves a new account starts at GID empty, has no membership row, and receives forbidden from tenant-protected work items. A trusted internal issuer generates enough random bytes, returns the encoded code once, and stores only a cryptographic hash. The invitation row owns the target tenant ID, intended normalized email, expiry time, and accepted at timestamp. Hashing means a read-only database leak does not immediately expose usable invitation codes. Identity and its database index require normalized email to be unique, so the binding identifies one account. The server compares the invitation with the live user's normalized email, not an email string supplied in the acceptance request. This episode keeps issuance internal because a public issuer needs an owner or administrator policy that does not exist yet. Tests call that trusted service directly without pretending every tenant member may invite people. Post API/tenant invitation/accept requires authentication, but not the tenant member policy. The separate registration test shows why a new account has no tenant claim, so requiring tenant membership here would make joining impossible. The request contract contains only one nullable code string. The endpoint derives the user identifier and exactly one security stamp claim from the authenticated principal. The store reloads that identity user, requires the submitted stamp to match the live row, and compares the user's live normalized email with the invitation. That stops the stale token created by an earlier acceptance from consuming another invitation. The bounded code is trimmed and hashed before lookup. Unknown, expired, consumed and wrong recipient codes receive the same bad request response, while an extra tenant ID JSON property is ignored and cannot redirect a valid invitation. Acceptance stages one state transition instead of making unrelated writes. Reload the invitation by hash, compare its normalized email with the live user, and check expiry plus accepted at before mutation. Then insert the composite membership or reactivate it with the next long version. Set featurelab_user.tenantID from the invitation, rotate security stamp, rotate the identity concurrency stamp and mark the invitation accepted before one save changes call. EFCore commits those writes in one transaction. The invitation version makes the final update fail if another request consumed the row after it was read. Membership version invalidates older relationship claims, while the user's optimistic concurrency stamp makes conflicting selector mutations one-winner transitions. The security stamp makes the bearer token used for acceptance stale. A fresh sign-in starts with featurelab_user.tenantID. The claims factory calls getActiveVersion async with that user ID and tenant selector, and receives a nullable long. getEmpty, a missing row or an inactive row returns null and produces no tenant membership claims. A current row emits tenant_ID and tenant_membership_version from server state. ASP.NET Core Identity also emits the current security stamp claim. The live tenant member requirement checks the user ID, selected tenant ID, security stamp and membership version against current rows on every protected request. Changing the selector, stamp, active flag or long version makes an older principal stale. The integration proof relies on authorization behavior rather than decoding a token. The old request becomes forbidden, while a fresh sign-in reaches only the selected target workspace. The primary integration proof provisions an initial membership and work item, signs in, and first gets OK while confirming that item is visible. Its acceptance JSON deliberately adds a tenant ID property beside the real invitation code. The request model ignores the extra property, the valid invitation succeeds, and the stored invitation still decides the target. That same token then receives forbidden. A fresh sign-in receives OK in the target workspace, and assert does not contain proves the original title is excluded. Separate tests use the wrong recipient, seed an already expired invitation, replay the code, race 2 sessions and try a second invitation with the stale security stamp. Those invalid attempts reject without consuming authority. The registration test separately proves getEmpty and no membership for a new account. Migration tests backfill non-empty episode 12 selectors and skip empty ones. We added explicit, versioned membership records without turning tenant ID into client input. A single-use invitation resolves the tenant, unique normalized email and expiry from stored state. Acceptance validates the live identity stamp, hashes the bounded code, creates or reactivates the composite membership, updates the server-owned selector, rotates both identity stamps and consumes the invitation atomically. Fresh sign-in emits tenant_ID and tenant_membership_version only after loading the active row, while live authorization rejects the old token. The extra tenant field cannot redirect a valid invite, wrong recipient, expired, replayed and concurrent invalid uses reject. Keep the scope honest. This episode switches workspace by accepting a new invitation. Deliberate switching later means listing memberships the user already holds and freely choosing one without needing or consuming another invitation. Public issuance and administrator actions remain separate authorization decisions.